Hey guys, welcome to Public History with Justin, Jake, and Molly. We have a really, really, really uplifting tale for you today. I'm super
Yeah,
excited.
yeah. Jake came into this just saying, I guess how did you describe it, Jake? That we're
Uh,
just gonna feel sad?
yeah, my coworkers in my day job call me Mr. Sadman because I have a tendency to tell really depressing stories. This is it's
Nickname.
eh, what a way to start, right? This is
I
what
was
you have
really
to look
hoping that
forward
was
to.
gonna be like but not this time. We're gonna tell you about sunshine and rainbows.
No, it's a tale that has some relevance to our own time period, and I think there's some valuable lessons that can be learned from this particular tale, and it's entwined with 20th and 21st century stories as well. So I think that there is some value in telling some sad stories from our past.
But
And
Justin, don't worry, we're promised lessons learned. So that
there are lessons learned. And if you too want to uh, just have sad stories that can tell the lessons of the past, make sure to like and subscribe. Let us know how great things are in the comments. And by great, just yeah, uplifting news with Jake. Here we go.
I want to start our episode with some more recent history. Go back to November 8th, 2018, in the town of Paradise, California. I can remember watching the events of that day playing out on Twitter back when I had Twitter. And this is one of the weird phenomenons of watching a disaster playing out in real time from thousands of miles away, and how unsettling that can be in the age of instant news and technology that we have available. So in Paradise that morning, the sky gets to be the color of rust. The wind is blowing. It's gusting up and down the high ridges of the Sierra Nevada. And there is a power line. And many of these stories of these fires out west start with a power line. And this power line, which is built 100 years before, snaps loose in the high winds and initiates a fire. And we know how these stories always go. People wake up that morning to the sound of sirens and the strange light as the sunrise comes through a growing cloud of smoke. And the people of Paradise, California look outside and they can see a line of smoke and flame coming towards them. It's 8 o'clock in the morning, and by that time, there's already a raging inferno coming towards them, and people flee. They head for Skyway, which is the main road leading out of this town, and they begin to crawl out of town as flames consume the town. Embers flying, heat melting paint off of cars. And this is a fire over the course of that day that consumes the entirety of the town of Paradise, California. In the course of this inferno, 85 people lose their lives, and more than 18,000 homes, businesses, and schools are destroyed in the course of a single day. And Paradise becomes infamous overnight as the latest in what has become a series of communities, especially out west, that have been consumed by these horrific wildfires. Now, what I found as I watched that day on Twitter and subsequent news stories of accounts coming out of that town as it's being consumed is that it reminded me instantly of a disaster that happened a century and a half earlier and consumed the town of Peshtigo, Wisconsin, which has the unfortunate place in American history as being the town consumed in the deadliest wildfire in American history. And the stories are really, really similar. And they are extremely important to study how we've returned to this age of wildfire caused by climate change, caused by extreme weather conditions, and also a little bit of the arrogance of building in these mountainous, forested areas that have burned and burned and burned again over the centuries, and yet we continue to go back to building and building neighborhoods, building communities in these places. And so I thought, with being Mr. Sadman, that I talk about the story of Peshtigo and the Peshtigo fire, because it is one of the most important disasters of the 19th century that no one's heard of. It's overshadowed by events that take place the same day, October 8th, 1871. The town of Peshtigo and neighboring communities in Wisconsin are consumed by fires. That same day, the Chicago fire breaks out, and Chicago is destroyed in this massive inferno that is going to become much more famous than Peshtigo will ever be. But there are really, really important lessons that come out of the Peshtigo fire, and that have relevance, like I said, for our time period today, and also influenced some interesting periods, morally dubious periods in military history in the 20th century as well. But we'll get to that. So, how does this sound so far, guys?
Question. Peshtigo is the deadliest fire ever still now?
In American history, correct. Peshtigo gets overshadowed in part because Peshtigo is pretty isolated. It's about 100 miles north of Chicago in a lumber, particularly an area with timber and forests, and it becomes a lumber community. So it's isolated, and Chicago is one of the great American cities. It is a destination. This is, of course, in the 1870s, a time when Americans are going west, and Chicago is really one of the jumping off points, along with St. Louis, for folks heading west, and also for cattle and products coming east as well from the west. So Chicago is this great crossroads of America at this time period, and the fact that it is consumed by this tremendous fire, and this is an era of vast urban fires. You'll go back through the history of most American cities, and there's going to be a great fire of some sort. For Chicago, it's particularly bad. And yeah, it has newspapers, it has connections, railroad and telegraph, to other places in America. That story is going to get flashed around the country and around the world, and the story of Peshtigo and what happens there is going to be overshadowed by those events. Any other questions before we go further?
I was going to ask you if Twitter was actually reliable back in 2018 for actually reporting the news during a disaster, because now you would not get accurate information.
It was great for consuming like events happening in real time and getting news as it was happening. And it's crazy in our post-Twitter era. I feel like, at least post-Twitter era for me, that I don't have, there's nothing quite the same as that as a platform for getting breaking news in real time. But I distinctly remember that day watching that story break out, because I've been interested in Peshtigo for a very long time and knew this story going back to my time working at the Civil War Medicine Museum. And because there's a lot of Civil War veterans that are going to get caught up in this story, and some of the accounts of this event are going to be told through the lens of people who experienced the American Civil War, and that's that's how they understand and the lens through which they interpret the disaster that consumes their town, their region. They're looking back through the lens of the Civil War, and that always fascinated me. So I had this 19th century lens, and watching this 19th century style disaster take place in 2018, I just found, one, horrifying, two, shockingly relevant to the experience of what happens in 1871. And that's why I wanted to tell this story.
Let's go.
All right.
Yeah, you got me hooked now. You got me hooked.
Okay.
Better have one like good citizen doing some sort of heroic deed so we get uplifted just a scotch.
Oh, I got something for you. Okay. All right, so let's look at the town of Peshtigo, Wisconsin. So it sits on the Peshtigo River. It was surrounded by pine and hemlock forests that fed lumber mills in the region. It was settled around 1838, in part because of the vast forests. It's going to attract folks that are going to come out there and start working in the lumber business. This is a community that's about 100 miles north of Chicago. and it's about 40 miles north of Green Bay, Wisconsin. And the Peshtigo River goes into Green Bay, into the waterway that then connects over to Lake Michigan. The town itself is really focused on that lumber business. It's built on it. There's going to be factories manufacturing furniture, going to be processing all of that lumber, then to be shipped via the lake and sent off to the cities along the Great Lakes. And it had experiences with fire in the past, and Americans at the time, especially out in the Midwest, they have experience with fire. Fire is used in a variety of different fashions, and it's used in agriculture, to clear off the land, to burn off brush. It's used by railroad crews that are working rapidly in the 1860s and 1870s to expand railroad lines across the United States. Fire is used to clear off brush along the tracks, and it's going to be used in a variety of different fashions like that. And this is going to mix with the conditions in the summer and fall of 1871 that's going to create a perfect recipe for disaster. When you get to the fall of 1871, this was a really dry summer for the Midwest, not just for this part of Wisconsin, but really for the entirety of the Midwest. And there were fires already breaking out. In our own time period, I know we all live here in the Mid-Atlantic, and we've been in the last few years living in a cloud of wildfire smoke from out west. This would have been the experience for those living in the upper Midwest in the summer and fall of 1871. There were fires. There's haze over the lakes, that makes navigating sometimes quite difficult for some of the sailors, and there are some concerning fires that happen around the town of Peshtigo in the weeks leading up to what will become the Great Peshtigo Fire. That set off alarm bells. There's kind of community fire brigades that are going to take action if they need to put out fires on the edge of town. And so there is a concern about this. And there is no expectation of what is going to, of what could transpire. This concept of a firestorm that we are quite familiar with today was not a familiar concept to the people of Peshtigo in 1871. But they're going to get an experience of this, the horrors of a firestorm on the night of October 8th, 1871. The weather conditions, you have that dry weather. It's been in place. There's a drought. Everything is bone dry. And then, what happens across the northern United States in the fall, you get these cold fronts that move through. And with those cold fronts, sometimes comes rain, oftentimes does not. And with it comes sometimes extreme winds out of the northwest. And that's what takes place on the evening of October 8th, 1871. It's going to push these heavy winds out ahead of it that are strong and sudden. And as darkness settles on that evening, all those scattered fires used in agriculture, used on the railroads, out there in the countryside, accidental fires that are set, campfires that are out there where the timber teams are working, all of these fires blow up. They become larger and larger and larger. And they are ultimately all going to fuse into one massive blaze. And the wind is going to turn these fires and these woods surrounding Peshtigo and villages around it. It's going to turn this area into a furnace. And these flames are going to move faster with the winds, faster than anyone can run. Really faster than somebody living in the 19th century can really even fathom. These winds are going to be estimated at moving this fire at 90 miles per hour.
Wait,
Faster.
what?
90 miles per hour. So this blaze just, the residents of Peshtigo can see the smoke, but it's similar to modern fires where it's all of a sudden there's some smoke, wind picks that up, and it blows into a massive fire before anyone can really understand that there is danger. And as these flames begin to descend on the town of Peshtigo, it comes with this massive roar as these flames and fires all come together. And one of the survivors of the fire, and this is one of those Civil War veterans, who is going to leave an account of what he experienced. He said that the roar of the fire was as if there were 100 cannons firing all at once. That's the experience, the sound of what it was like. And as the fire descends on the town, another survivor is going to write that it rained fire. The air itself was on fire. And the firestorm is going to race over the town of Peshtigo and its roughly 2,000 residents. And this wall of flame, about a mile wide, is going to spin through the treetops and is going to essentially drop those trees and any foliage remaining on those trees onto the town and like fireballs. And the town, all made of wood, is going to burst into flames. And this is going to send, as you could imagine, all of the people fleeing in whatever direction they felt was safest. As the fire is moving in on them from the west, they're going to be seeking shelter as fast as they can. So imagine that scene. It's night. It's pitch black. Now even blacker as smoke and dust is blowing, and you can't see anything except for these flames that are racing into town. There's people running. Some of them are already clothing on fire. There are horses that have been left out of the stables to flee and find safety. Houses are literally exploding from the heat. Church steeples on fire, the lumber mill goes up in flames, and then the bridge that crosses over the Peshtigo River is going to be consumed by this as well. Parents are grabbing children, they're running, and there is absolute pandemonium. And where are people going to run? Most people are going to run for the river, exactly. And this is where hundreds of people are going to take refuge. As the town burns down around them, this is the only refuge for them. And people, it's so hot that people are forced to repeatedly submerge in the water, which it's October, so it's actually pretty cold. The water is cold. So they are caught between freezing and hypothermia in the water and burning to death above the water. This is... If people stayed out above the water too long, their hair could catch on fire. That's the nature of what's going on. People are hanging on to logs and debris. Burning timbers are everywhere, and above them, embers of the fire are falling everywhere. People are seeking shelter in their homes. This is not going to end well. They're going to find victims of the fire in basements of homes and in wells in town that were untouched by the flames, but had suffocated because all of the oxygen had been swept up into the firestorm itself. And there's going to be descriptions. There's actually, they refer to this as a tornado of fire. So you've probably seen videos of this from modern wildfires, of these fire tornadoes that are created. Well, these are being seen by the people in the water, watching their town be consumed, and they're seeing these tornadoes of fire. It is truly a perfect firestorm that consumes Peshtigo on the night of October 8th. By dawn, the town is entirely gone, and about 15 or 16 other villages surrounding Peshtigo are also gone, as is part of a neighboring community of Marinette, Wisconsin, as well. What is the toll from this in human terms? It's one of those disasters in the 19th century, much like Johnstown in Pennsylvania, where I grew up, which is a disaster of the exact opposite sort, of a wall of water consuming an American community, that we don't really know. That there are estimates for what the death toll is. The official count's going to come to 1,200. But historians believe that the true number is likely closer to 2,000 victims.
Oh my gosh.
Of this. Some families are entirely wiped out, leaving no one to record their names. But so many of the bodies of those in this that are consumed in this fire are unrecognizable, and they're going to end up buried together in one mass grave of 350 people. That is a grave that is still marked in the community today. This is one of the worst disasters in American history.
Did the town, like, were there groups of survivors, or was it literally like everyone got wiped out?
No, there are groups of survivors. So a lot of hundreds of people that go into the river make it. They are going to survive. We're about to talk about one of them, who's going to become one of the most important people in keeping a record of what happened at Peshtigo that day. But yeah, there are hundreds of survivors of this. They're going to be the ones who are going to rebuild the town. Some are going to leave, understandably so, but others are going to rebuild the community in this place.
Well, and I guess this is a question I have for how today, modern day, you have video, you have audio, you can fly things there, you can get, I guess, uh, relief supplies and stuff to locations pretty quickly. I'm thinking in my head, if something happens back then, or something obviously happened back then, word of the disaster is only going to travel as far as I guess horseback, depending upon the telegraph lines if they're connected to Peshtigo and if the line goes down. So I guess there is a way that it could get pretty quickly. I'm just thinking
Yeah.
like nowadays you'd have the Red Cross or whatever there very quickly with water, tents, and stuff for people to survive. What is the response of I guess the state? I guess who would be the ones that would lead the efforts there?
Yeah, it would be state organizations, but really at a volunteer level. You're right, there is no American Red Cross
There's
at
no
this point.
FEMA either, right? So
There
it's
is no
just like
FEMA. And a lot of the attention as well as the relief supplies are going to end up going to Chicago because as we mentioned earlier, the Chicago fire happens at the same time. The same weather conditions, the same intense windstorm that sweeps across Wisconsin sweeps across the city of Chicago and takes some flames in the city of Chicago and sets the entire city alight.
the cow. You can say the cow. Reckless speculation.
I'm
I'm just
not
gonna
going to
say
say the cow. It's not Mrs. O'Leary's cow. I think poor Mrs. O'Leary. We won't slander her further. Um, in terms of relief efforts, there's not a lot of relief coming in the 19th century. There will be, organizations in surrounding communities that aren't affected by the fires, or at least affected in this way, that are going to send relief. But these fires actually go up this entire peninsula off to the east. They sweep over Peshtigo and they continue over and destroy some of these other villages in the surrounding area as well. And this does get almost entirely overshadowed by what happens in Chicago. You'll read in October of 1871, the headlines are all about Chicago. There's very little coverage of what happens in Peshtigo, in part because of its isolation, and also because the fact that an American city had just been destroyed in this massive fire that consumed Chicago. And so, this is largely forgotten. It's forgotten. This story becomes part of Wisconsin state history, becomes local lore, and the local residents are really the ones who are going to keep the memory of this disaster, by establishing memorials at the mass grave, by building a museum, by passing these stories down through generations of those who survived. Now to get to one of those firsthand survivors, his story is going to really help us in the 21st century to understand this disaster because he writes an account of his experience in the years after the disaster, and publishes it. And that gives us a window into the experience of what it was like to live through the Peshtigo fire. He was a local Catholic priest, named Father Peter Pernin. He was actually French, so his name was actually Jean-Pierre Pernin, but he went by Peter, in these towns in Wisconsin. And he had two parishes, one in Peshtigo and one in a neighboring town as well. And he is in Peshtigo on the night of the fire. And he describes the firestorm sweeping over the town. He describes that flight into the river. He is one of those that goes into the river. He is going to take the tabernacle from his church with him, and takes it to the river, and puts it in the water, and that's what saves it. The church burns down. Everything there is lost, but he's able to save this, which he calls kind of a minor miracle,
What a
um,
guy. Oh my
that
god.
he's able to save this. And And so he gives us a lot of this description of what it was like to live through the fire. He publishes in both French and English an account of the fire and the events leading up to it and the events after it. And he writes about the fire. He writes about living through it. This is where it gets a little. He had a perspective. He is a Catholic priest. And he is going to cast a little bit of blame for the fires.
No.
He is going to, throughout the account, kind of refer back to Peshtigo as being like the Sodom of the region. That it was the drunkenness of the taverns and the brothels in this timber town that are going to unleash the wrath of God on the town of Peshtigo. So that is, in addition to being the best firsthand account of it, we also get his, religious opinion on the morality of the community that is consumed in the fire.
I kind of took back my "what a guy" comment. I was like, the Catholics are doing something right, and then
This is what I'm here for. I am like, oh, I'm gonna make you love a character, and I'm gonna be like,
Sadman.
but they are a person, and people are complicated. But he's gonna keep his story is gonna keep the memory of the Peshtigo fire alive. It's gonna be subsequently republished by the Wisconsin Historical Society in the 20th century as well, to be keep up the memory of Peshtigo and what happened. So in the years that follow the disaster, the town rebuilds, the lumber business carries on, the forest is going to regrow and then be cut down again, and the town's going to grow back on that same grounds over the same ashes of the community that was there before, and the world largely moves on. There are going to be similar fires that are going to consume parts of the upper Midwest in the 1890s, and then again in the 19-teens. In the 19-teens, there's a fire in Minnesota that will be the second deadliest fire in American history. And when you talk about the relief efforts, by that time the American Red Cross is established, and there is a humanitarianism that is settled in. We have relief organizations that are going to provide relief to the victims of those fires. But these vast urban fires, by the mid part of the 20th century, are going to become pretty rare in the United States. But the idea of what happens at Peshtigo sticks around. The science specifically of it is going to be studied by foresters, by others in the science in the sciences, just understanding what happened at Peshtigo. What were the conditions that created this firestorm that was really unprecedented, and the death toll certainly that was unprecedented. And there's going to be a name that's later going to be given to this by researchers and then subsequent historians. They're going to refer to it as the Peshtigo paradigm. And this is looking at all those scenarios, the chain reaction that is going to bring a group of small fires together and create a firestorm that can create its own weather, create these fire tornadoes, create that 90-mile-per-hour wind. A firestorm so intense it can generate those hurricane force winds and temperatures that can melt some metals. And this is going to play a part in, you're going to get to the morally dubious part of the 20th century and military history, because in the 1940s, there's something big going on in the world. It's the Second World War.
Ah, shoot. I thought it was something else. Dang it.
And we see what's happening with new technology, bombing raids.
I know where you're going with this.
1939 and 1940 that are going to consume Warsaw and Poland and communities in France and Belgium and the Netherlands, and then the Battle of Britain and the Blitz in London. And there's going to be these vast fires that start during these bombing raids by the Germans, and then this leads the Allies to want to return fire, fight fire with fire, and target civilian communities in Axis countries like Nazi Germany, like Japan. And so the researchers and military leaders are going to go back to Peshtigo And they're going to look at these circumstances of what created that perfect firestorm, and they
Oh
are
my
going to
gosh.
seek a way to create it themselves.
This was a twist I did not see coming. I'm not gonna lie.
So there's going to be research done into the wind, the humidity, the temperature, the structures that are in a community, and how they can create and manufacture one of these firestorms. One of the first tests of this is going to be done in 1943 in what is going to become known as Operation Gomorrah. So some references back to the twin town of the one of Peshtigo, aka Sodom, that Father Pernin was talking about. And this is a series of bombing raids that are going to take place over the city of Hamburg, Germany, in the summer of 1943, which is going to is designed to initiate one of those firestorms. And it does. And it kills tens of thousands of Hamburg residents. I can personally attest to seeing some of the damage of this on a visit there to Hamburg about 3 years ago. And there's still a memorial to the victims of that firestorm. There's a church in the center of Hamburg that was at one time, its steeple was the tallest structure, man-made structure in the world. And to this day, they left the steeple blackened by the fires. Still stands as a memorial. It stands like this black shadow on the city skyline during the day. It's quite haunting. But this was a designed firestorm, created in part with the model of what happened in Peshtigo in mind, and it's going to come later for other cities. Dresden is going to be another one.
Yeah, like I just is just there's somebody in the World War like in the bombing department in the 8th Air Force or is it Curtis LeMay who's like, you know what? I studied Peshtigo way back when. Let's do that again.
That was
Right?
exactly my question. Like, who is
Like
Peshtigo?
it's just some random Wisconsin guy, probably in the Air Force. It's like, hey guys, you know what we can do? And do you actually? Jake, you said yes. I'm assuming.
Yeah, so it's definitely not, it's not anybody at the highest
Some
levels that's
random,
like, Peshtigo, let's do that. It's more so at the lower level of this research as they're testing incendiaries, like how do you create these fire bombs that are going to be dropped. The British are really, because the British are the ones that the U.S. the U.S. Army Air Force in World War II in Europe specifically does not necessarily believe in bombing cities. They're going to be doing strategic bombing. They're going to be targeting factories and railroad yards and oil facilities. Of course, many of them are located in and around major cities, and they don't have precision bombing, even though they say they do. So cities are pummeled by American bombers, but we're not specifically targeting civilians. The British are specifically targeting civilians. So they are creating incendiaries. They're researching to find the perfect bombs, perfect flames. How do you get the bomblets through the roofs of German buildings to light up the insides? They're researching all of this. And it is Allied researchers that are going to access, not just from Peshtigo, other fires and throughout history, to find and understand how to create and manufacture that firestorm. So like I said, it's going to come for other cities as well. Dresden is a famous example in the early parts of 1945, city that's going to be consumed in one of these firestorms. But the most famous and most horrific in my mind is what happens in Tokyo in March 1945. And this is where Americans, and this is where Curtis LeMay specifically comes into the mix of, we were deliberately targeting Japanese cities. And Japanese cities were almost exclusively made of wood. Homes were made of wood. And so in the spring of 1945, we target Tokyo with a firebombing campaign that is going to leave more than 100,000 people dead. It actually kills more than the bombing of Hiroshima. And there is one historian who writes about the Peshtigo fire, and in talking about the legacy of the Peshtigo fire, he talks about the firebombing in World War II. And he looks through the accounts of the Japanese survivors of the bombing on Tokyo, and he says, quote, "If you took out 3 or 4 words, you were describing the same event."
Mm.
So the same things, the fleeing, these flames, the winds, trying to find protection in water and going into waterways to seek refuge from the flames sticks around. And it sticks out from these stories in 1945, and it's all the same physics. It's the same firestorm, only this time it wasn't by accident, wasn't nature. It was used as a weapon of war. And we can talk about the morality of that. I'm fascinated by those conversations because there's lots of arguments about whether that was, an ethical decision to make, to target civilians during the Second World War. But it is an undeniable fact that Peshtigo and its circumstances is put into the mix of this story from World War II because it was studied and looked at and researched in order to create that perfect firestorm during the Second World War. Y'all sad yet?
It bums me out so much. That we took something that was like, as you were describing it, hell on earth, like literally running from fire, escaping into freezing water, going into your wooden house, not being able to breathe, so you just die, like hell on earth, and then being like, "Oh, cool, we're gonna study this and do that again to other people intentionally." So I'm gonna tell you how I feel about the morality of that situation
Yeah.
right now. Not a fan. And you don't target civilians, right? Isn't that one of the tenets of a just war? So,
Supposed to be.
Justin, just give me some knowledge.
It's supposed to be, and like I think you bring up, and I'm not going to turn this into a World War II podcast because it's not. We don't need to go down that route. But I think you bring up it's an interesting juxtaposition of like you have the U.S. Army in Europe, which is like, no, we don't want to touch civilians, and then you have the U.S. Army in the Pacific, or the U.S. Air Force in the Pacific, and U.S. Air Force in Europe, and being like, nah, yes, you can hit the civilians. It doesn't matter. It's just like it's just too. Once again, without turning this into a World War II podcast, it's just very interesting to me that we could choose on one side to be like, you know what, let's try to do this ethically, and maybe we failed in some senses of doing that. But then on the other side, it's like, yeah, gloves off, let's do whatever. I don't know.
It is an interesting, what's the difference?
Why is that?
I was gonna
That's
say,
why I'm like, what is the difference there?
Between Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan. Yeah, that's another podcast episode.
That's another podcast. That's already another podcast.
So to bring it up to the present day, so for most of the 20th century, as I mentioned before, in the United States, these large wildfires that consume American communities, not just, we have vast wildfires that take place in national parks, thinking Yellowstone, Glacier National Park, other areas, and some communities on the edge of these forests are lost through the 20th century, but nothing on the scale of what you see at Peshtigo. Until we get to the 21st century. So we are in a new epoch now. As climate change has brought temperatures up, it has changed weather patterns, has made droughts worse, has made winds more fierce. And we also have conditions where, as populations in communities in the American West, in California specifically, but not only California, have grown into that divide between suburban areas and forests and mountains. And these are places that have burned, and fire is, of course, a natural part of the forest's life cycle. Trees and forests are, in many cases, they're designed to burn and designed as part of how renewal happens in the forest. And we Americans have disrupted this natural cycle. And with that disruption of natural cycles and the human element of building in these areas and the changing weather conditions have again begun to create that perfect mix to bring back the firestorms that we saw in the 19th and early 20th century in America. And we see that to return to Paradise, California in November of 2018, a morning just like any other until the winds come on and that dry brush takes light, the conditions are perfect, and the firestorm commences. And this has happened now with some frequency. Let's say 2018 in Paradise, in 2023 in Lahaina, in Hawaii, very similar to the circumstances of both the Paradise Fire and what happens in Peshtigo, another disaster that takes place in the era of live streaming. You could see this disaster playing out in real time from other communities watching this cloud of smoke consume this historic community on the island of Maui. And again, hurricane force winds, again, people seeking refuge, taking into the water to escape the flames, and no warning comes. And it happens again and again and again. And we add to that just this year, in 2025, what happened in Pacific Palisades and Altadena in California. And we have these conditions, these perfect firestorms that have come back time and time and time again. And we see this Peshtigo paradigm has now come for us in the 21st century. And there are lessons that we can learn from this. And I'm given some hope by researchers that have been looking into this. And I think this is something, as we get into how do we build resilient communities in the 21st century, we can look to these disasters, whether they be in the 1870s, but really the ones that have occurred just within the last few years. There are lessons to be learned. Should some of these neighborhoods and communities ever be rebuilt in the places that they were, when we know that there were fires that have historically impacted these areas? Should we look at how these homes are built? How close together are they constructed? What are they made of? How are they designed? What kind of shrubbery, greenery is put around these homes? These are all lessons that can be learned. And so we can, take that idea of studying the fires of the past and be not like our forebearers in the mid-20th century and use them as weapons of war, but we can use them as tools to build more resilient communities in the future. That's the hopeful bit of this story. We think we can learn from the past here. We can learn from the past and we can build those more resilient communities. Now, will we? Is a great question. Because it's expensive and people want to rebuild their homes. And when you tell them that as a government or communities, specifically governments though, say that you can't rebuild in that place, people get really angry. And so we have some big decisions ahead of us as communities in the United States when it comes to, we have to deal with the realities of climate change, that these kinds of conditions are going to be much more common in the future. But there are steps that we can take to mitigate these circumstances and learn from our history and apply that to now. So that's the hopeful bit.
That is hopeful. And
A little bit.
while you were talking about Peshtigo, I looked it up because I on maps and I wanted to try to see, the geography and everything. And I don't know if this is a good bookend to the end of the story, but the restaurant that came up on my screen as soon as I opened Peshtigo, want to take a guess of the name of the restaurant? Embers 1871. So when you're in Peshtigo, be sure to go visit Embers 1871. This is not a plug for them, unless they want to sponsor the show. Maybe just this episode.
We know so well that we Americans will also make a profit off of these. You gotta. It's good. It's good capitalism. I think of of course Justin also probably falls into this category of like putting everything into a Civil War perspective. And it's like the town of Gettysburg after this battle that, 51,000 casualties, and it becomes a tourist attraction basically overnight. So that is not surprising to me at all, Justin, that there is an Embers 1871 restaurant.
Yeah. Just thought I'd put that out there.
All right, so have I depressed you all?
Yeah, I'm not as hopeful as you, my friend. I feel like we took that lesson of how to create firestorms and we ran with it real quick. And
Mm,
we're not really taking the lessons of building safe communities.
yeah.
So,
Well, and I once again, while I was looking up Peshtigo as you were talking about it too, I came across the Peshtigo Fire Museum, which is
Hmm.
in Peshtigo. It's the website of the Peshtigo Historical Society.
Yep.
And I guess in a good way, or not in a good way, but they have a quote here that I think is good to describe kind of how we move on from something like Peshtigo, or how a community moves on from something like Peshtigo. It says, "Today, Peshtigo is a thriving small town that is a monument to its historic past. It survives because of the brave souls and hardworking survivors that believed we could go on."
oh,
So, that is saying something, that the folks decided, hey, let's stay, let's rebuild, and let's get after it again. So here they are. I do wonder the media aftermath of that fire. If you take somebody and you say, all right, hey, what is that? 200 years from now, 150 years, 160. My math's terrible. Um, the town's still here. People still remember the fire, whether good or bad. Embers 1871. It's people are remembering the fire in a way.
It will get to, and some of these more recent disasters, how are they going to be remembered? And how are the members of those communities going to memorialize their communities as they were before the fire, and what will happen in the future? So it's a little bit of like, how will they differ or be the same from places like Peshtigo that have similar experiences? Will they go on like they were before, or will it be different? Will it be different with the redesign of these communities in mind, or not? And that's very much a question that is being settled now, especially in California. As I was pulling this together, recording this in early November of 2025, there are many lawsuits, investigations, things going on about what went wrong with the Palisades and the Altadena fires, and what was within human control, and also about what wasn't in human control, and how to prevent these kinds of things in the future. So it is, we're living in a world, that's very similar to, a post-Peshtigo world, where, there are communities in this country that are dealing with very real, similar aftermaths of what happens when your community is essentially wiped out in one of these disasters. And firestorms, wildfires, a unique creature in terms of their ability to come so quickly without warning, and their ability to, essentially consume entire lives, homes, businesses in a matter of seconds or minutes. It's a unique kind of disaster and terror that has kind of leapt out of the pages of history and is now affecting us in the world today.
I feel like what Justin said about the people of Peshtigo like staying and rebuilding and like remembering, that does bring me hope. And I feel like some of the stories that we heard out of California this past year, like it's like it's like the small, the individual, like those stories are really important and they give me hope. It's very Tolkien-y, like
Mhm.
hobbits. I'm not so hopeful about like humanity as a whole, or like government stepping in to do the right thing, but I think the like spirit of the people who survive is very inspiring, and the people who didn't survive and remembering them. But you said
Y-
this story was going to keep getting worse and worse, and you were correct about that one. You were like, so there's this fire, and then
There
and
are
then
we
more fires.
we studied the fire and we recreated the fire because that's what we do.
for other people to make it worse. Yeah. Wow,
Yeah.
that was a really good story. I had no idea where we were going with it.
Yes, I'm glad to, again, this is something that has lived rent free in my mind for a very long time. So to be able to share it and provide some context and, Yeah, this is one that's weird to me to see it again, knowing this story for a long time and thinking about it, and then watching it happen again
Mm.
is the really the craziest piece. That this is something that I never thought I would, you never thought you'd see something like this, but now it's happened, and it's happened multiple times. It's quite frightening, but also yeah, it's just endlessly fascinating to me because now we have a window into what it was like to live through that experience because we've seen it now recorded on video. And yeah, and I don't know about you guys, but this I'll betray my my YouTube habits. But in the aftermath of the fires in California, I found myself just watching these recorded live streams of some of the I would say peculiar kind of YouTuber in California that's like a weather slash fire um, live streamer. They go out, they cover these fires that happen, of course, seasonally in California, and talk about firefighting efforts. Some of them are firefighters themselves, and some of their footage from specifically the Palisades fire is some of the most harrowing footage that I've ever seen. Just showing us scenes of what Peshtigo would have looked like. It was horrifying, but also one of those things that you can't look away from because it's like the fact that this has now been captured, this human experience that's been around for as long as civilization has existed, as long as we've had fire. But to see it captured with 21st century technology is, I found it to be, yeah, a little bit like train wrecky, can't look away kind of situation.
'Cause I don't remember Paradise, but as you were describing Peshtigo with like I was like, he's gonna say fire tornado because I feel like that's like these California ones. That's what was so scary, and just like the perfect storm of wind and just everything bad. See, my algorithm's different because I kept seeing um the firefighters come from like different states and like Mexico to help, and I was just sobbing and being like, "We're all gonna be okay."
Yep, you are I'm glad that you are given the hopeful algorithm
Yeah.
because as you're all learning, you two and all of the listeners out there, and my algorithm is probably quite depressing.
You know,
um, but what can I say? I grew up. This was a conversation just this week. I grew up. I was a Titanic kid. I have those obsessions as a kid, especially if you go down the history rabbit hole. That you had the thing that you were obsessed with. I was one of the Titanic children. Um, Still fascinated by it. Thank you, Robert Ballard, and your kid's book about the discovery of the Titanic because it sent me down this path.
I
Here
love
I
this.
am.
I love this.
Yep, I can thank the Titanic and the Johnstown flood and the book about that and being a Pennsylvanian myself. That's what sent me down this road. That's what sent me on the path to making a podcast episode about the Peshtigo fire of 1871.
I'm not gonna lie, my husband was like, "What are you guys gonna talk about?" And I was like, "Some fires." He was like, "Oh."
And he's going to listen to this and be like, who is Jake and why do you give him a microphone? That's Mr. Sadman.
Thank you everybody for joining us for today. So ask that you guys follow, rate, subscribe, share the podcast so Jake's depressing stories can make their way out on the airwaves for everybody to listen to. We'll see you next time on Public History with Jake, Justin, and Molly.
Bye.